Before you start listening, I wanted to apologize for some of the audio in these episodes. If I had known at the time that I was going to turn this into a podcast, I would have done things differently. Some of the stories might not be in the order they should be, and some of the audio might cut in and out. This is because I had to edit out our private conversations. I'm grateful for the opportunity I had to be able to visit with Janice over the last few years and hear her story. She's an amazing storyteller and has a really neat story to share. I hope you all enjoy it as much as I did.
And they didn't his parents live by you guys?
Yeah, Vernon, um, got the ranch from his mother, Pearl Polson Hayhurst, and so the old home that Ed grew up in is no longer there, but Leona and Vernon lived down, they built a new house a year after we got married. They built a new house in 63, and then we bought the ranch from them in 1970. Yeah, we built our home in 1984. We started it in March of 84 and moved in the 1st of June of 84.
So when and how did you meet Ed?
I met him on the first day of college at Utah State University, the beginning of September of 1960. And I was living in the dorm, Reeder Hall at Utah State, and Ed was in Richards Hall, and his roommate used to live in Springville. And one of my roommates was from Springville. So Ed and Mick came over to my dorm so that Mick could see the Roylance. I can't remember her first name. And Ed was with him. And so we became friends, but he went home that day, went back to the dorm, and told Mick, I'm going to marry her.
What did you guys used to do for dates?
We did some group dating. We didn't date a lot alone. He would call to talk to me or come over, and my roommate had a case on him, and so they would tell him that I wasn't home. And so I didn't know that. So on Halloween, which was almost 2 months later, they talked me into dressing up for the town Halloween party. And I had an old pair of Levi's, Dad's, and you put them down around the top of your thighs. And then I had a great big flour sack, pieces of great big white dish towels, and they painted a face on it. And then they stuffed it with newspapers, and my arms was an old shirt of Dad's, and they stuffed it with newspaper. So that was right around my waist and down, and I had hangers to form my arms and hands. And then, yeah, there was a contest that was what I was going for, was a contest at Albertsons. Anyway, I was all stuffed with newspapers, and Ed and Mick came over, and he put his hat. Remember the hats? They still wear them, but kids don't. With the brims that Grandpa used to wear.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so he put that kind of hat on my head. And girls across the hall from us on the third floor. So I was down in the bottom in the foyer, and the stairs wound up to our different apartments. They dumped a bucket of water on my head. So it got Ed's hat wet and the papers all wet. Well, anyway, we went downtown to Albertsons, and it was not for adults, it was for kids, the contest. And I was pretty little. And so, of course, on a dare, they said, go ahead, go. You won't win. Go ahead, go. And so they'd walk us, and there were over 100 kids. And so they put us all in this huge circle in the parking lot, and we walked around, and they would pull you out if for some reason you weren't going to stay in the contest. Well, it got down, and there was me and another kid, and I won the contest. And so everybody was just howling from the dorms, because here I was a college student, and I'd won a little kids contest. And so they kept saying to me, well, you need to take your costume off so we can see what you look like. Well, I couldn't take my costume off. First of all I had on was my underwear underneath all that. But anyway, we did fun things like that. The prize was candy. Lots and lots and lots and lots of candy. So I just took it home back to the dorm and shared it with the boys. And so we did kind of group things. The movie was really cheap, like $0.25. We went, Ed built some trails up Logan Canyon. We walked them, mostly just spending time together. Then he went home, came home to Oregon that summer of 61 to work for the Forest Service. And I went home and I worked for Del Monte weighing trucks and grading what the quality of the peas or the tomatoes or the corn. I ended up with, I think I told you about passing out in front of the semi.
No, I didn't hear that.
Okay, so I was bringing a semi onto the scales, and I'd had a lot of problems with my periods and pain, and evidently I was sicker than I thought I was, and I passed out getting the truck. I passed out right in front of him, and he, of course, stopped, and they took me to the hospital, and I ended up with emergency surgery, and I had a small tumor and some cysts on my ovary. And so I wasn't able to work. After that, Mom and Dad and Richard and I went fishing down to Fish Lake. While we were down fishing, Ed told his mom that he had to go get his books and stuff from a friend in Burley. But he came clear to Spanish Fork without telling me he was coming. So our neighbor, anyway, we were in the house there on 4th East. They told him that we'd gone fishing at Fish Lake, and that it was a pink and white little Dalton trailer and a kind of a pinkish beige Ford car pulling it. So in Utah, there's more than one Fish Lake, and he happened to pick the right one, and he found the trailer in the camping site, knocked on the door. I was floored, and I said, "What in the HE double toothpicks are you doing here?" I was shocked. Well, Grandma and Grandpa, he needed to stay. That trailer was really little. Our bedroom is twice the size of it. It was really little. So I had been sleeping on the mats up in front under the table. Richard was on the bunk up above the back bed. So they hung blankets, old army blankets, up. Ed slept with Richard on the bunk, and he had to go outside to the outhouse to go potty so that we wouldn't see each other. So he drove down. He ended up coming down twice as a surprise, and the second time he came, I missed him. So then our sophomore year, we dated. We spent a lot of time together. And I bought him a new green parka. He needed a coat. And he came down for New Year's. Let's see, did he get there? He must have got there the day or 2 days before New Year's Eve. Anyway, I said, "Let me take your coat." And I took it and just threw it on Richard's bed. And he about had a heart attack. I said, "What's wrong?" It's just a coat. It's just a ski coat. So evidently he had asked Mom. You asked Mom first, didn't you, honey? I think he asked Mom first. She wore the pants in a lot of ways. And then he asked Dad. I had no idea. It was the farthest thing from my mind. So Mom and Dad went down to Mark and Ruth Bowen's, and Uncle Ted and Aunt LaRue and Waldo and Emma and Uncle Roy and Aunt Marie. They were down there having their New Year's party. Ed and I went to dinner and got back to the house about 11:30, and we were just sitting downstairs watching the fire in the fireplace, and he asked me to marry him. And my ring had been in that zipper of the coat I'd given him, and that's why he was freaking out. And so anyway, then I called Mom and Dad, and they said, "Okay, you got to come down and show everybody your ring." Let me see, I can't remember what I was worth. He sold some of his cows and his sheep for my ring. And I have the same we were engaged 1961 New Year's Eve. We went back to school. We'd only been there, I don't know, maybe about a month, still back in our dorms. He was living in a house, just had rented a bedroom, and I was in a house with 15 other girls and one bathroom. But anyway, we decided to get married on the 13th of September, which was a Friday of 1962. So New Year's Eve was 61. January 1st was 62. So he went back after we finished our sophomore year. During my sophomore year, I broke my leg. I broke my right leg again. I fell and right at the end and broke my tailbone and had to sit on one of those red pooper pillows. And so he came home to Oregon, and he worked for the Forest Service. I went back for Del Monte weighing trucks and grading. I didn't see him all summer until 2 nights before we were to get married. And he and your grandpa, he and Richard, went to Logan to our apartment. And the apartment is really little. There was no stove, no refrigerator, no furniture. And so Richard had worked for Breathwaite at the kind of the farm implement type store there on Main Street in Spanish Fork, and he had paint that didn't turn out the right colors that customers wanted. So he and Ed got this paint and came up and painted the whole apartment. The day after that, it was the day before we were to get married, there was an earthquake right on the Idaho-Utah border from Preston, Franklin. And it didn't do damage to the Logan Temple where we were getting married. They closed the temple that day. So it put all the brides onto our day, as well as all of us that had scheduled. And at that time, you took out your endowments the same day. So we had to go through the temple to get our endowments. So we drove to Logan, Mom and Dad, and we got up and we met his mom and dad and brothers and sisters, brothers and his sister in Logan, and Ed stayed in Logan, and they stayed in our apartment. So we had to leave Spanish Fork at 2 o'clock in the morning because I had to be at the temple at 5 o'clock. So that was really a crazy day. I had a long train on my dress. It was so crowded. It was crazy. And this girl, this bride behind me, I picked up the train as best I could. And that is just nuts that I remember that. She'd step on my train, and it would just stop me short. We went through the temple. I got out around 2 o'clock, went to the Bluebird Cafe on Logan Main Street. Oh, first we took some pictures, just a couple of pictures. Well, Ed's dad had a mustache, and we only had one little light globe in our apartment. And he had messed up shaving and shaved part of his mustache off. So when he got to the temple, everybody was shocked because he didn't have a mustache. Anyway, we went to the Bluebird Cafe and ate. And then our reception was the next night in Spanish Fork. So we stayed right there by the temple in Salt Lake, about a block from the temple. And we watched, oh my gosh, it's an old Western. We drove to Spanish Fork. I got my hair done. We had our reception in the backyard. Dad had this, he always had such beautiful yards. And the thing that stands out to Ed at that night, there were about 2,500 people that came to the reception.
Oh my God.
Ed swore up and down that they'd gone through the phone book and invited everybody and just crossed out a couple of names. They didn't, but it was, the only thing he remembers about it was Mr. and Mrs. Money and Mr. and Mrs. Banks came through together. That was when you displayed your trousseau and all this stuff. So all that was displayed in Mom and Dad's bedroom and the living room. And I was so exhausted. I had all these buttons down the back of my dress, and they've got a picture of me just sitting on the floor. I said, I don't care. Ed said, they're going to kidnap you. And Richard said, my friends, our friends from high school and college were going to kidnap me. I says, okay, as long as they unbutton the back of my dress. I don't care. So I don't remember a lot about that night. The line didn't break up till like 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, and it started at 7. It was crazy. We had breakfast out on the patio with relatives, and the neighbor's girl, Cherie, she had a little dog, and she wasn't potty trained. Well, Cherie wasn't potty trained either. Cherie came and sat on my lap at breakfast time because they were right next door, and I had a new dress on, and I was all la-di-da dressed up, and she peed all over my lap. And so, and in those days, they weren't 2-piece garments. They were 1-piece. And of course, I had to go in and shower and change it. And then we drove that afternoon. Dad and Richard and Mom rented a U-Haul, a trailer, and took what little bit of furniture we had. We moved in there, and his sister, Nancy, her dorm wasn't quite finished. So she lived with us the first 10 days we were married. She was in the apartment with us. And it was a 1-bedroom, little itty-bitty bathroom. If somebody was on the toilet, the other person had to be standing in the shower. We went to the DI and bought a single burner hot plate for 50 cents, bought an oven for $1 that you could cook 6 chocolate chip cookies in, or you could bake a chocolate cake, 3 pans, one at a time, 8-inch pans. And then we rented a refrigerator. I think it was like $2, and then we rented a table and 2 chairs. So we had less than $5 into all of our furnishings. And we lived there for 2 years. We called it the lambing sheds because they were old barracks from the Army. No phone. We'd set a time on Sunday evenings, and Mom and Dad would call, and Leona and Vernon would call, because it was payphones. We didn't have a pot to pee in. I was working and going to school, and Ed was commandant of the ROTC Air Force, the Angel Flight. He was over all the women cadets. Oh, he had a lot of cadets that were flirting with him, of the girls. And most of them didn't know he was married, even though he was wearing a wedding ring. I fell down again with my stubbornness. Ed didn't have to go to class this one morning, and we always walked to class together. We were on campus, but we had to walk a ways to class. And we got a lot of snow. Ed said, I'll walk you. And I said, no, I can do it myself. I'm perfectly capable. I won't fall down. I walked down the sidewalk, fell on my butt, broke the tailbone again, and shoved it. It went into the birth canal. So, anyway, Ed had to take me to the hospital. Well, we went to the clinic first, and Dr. Budge, he put the casts on my two broken legs, and he had taken care of me when I broke my tailbone the first time. And he had kind of adopted Ed and I. He said, if I had a daughter, I'd like her to be like you. Well, we didn't have any insurance. Anyway, I had to have surgery. I was in the hospital a little over almost 2.5 weeks. They had to remove the tailbone, and I laid with my head down, and I couldn't lay on my back or my side. And so Ed would go to class, do his ROTC duties, come help me. So when I had the surgery, it was really expensive. And Ed went at the hospital financial thing to make arrangements that we could make payments. And they said, you don't have a bill. And Ed said, yes, I do. Janice is in yada yada room, and she had this and this done and this surgery. And they said, no, it's all been paid for. And Dr. Budge had paid for all my hospitalization and charged us nothing for his surgery, which was just such a blessing. And right after that, I got pregnant with Brent. When I got pregnant with Brent and finally realized I was pregnant, Ed was on a forestry field trip down the Oregon coast. And I sent him a letter because he was gone for 3 weeks or something. And I sent him a letter and I said, Dear Daddy. So that's how he found out I was pregnant. And our goal was to graduate, both of us graduate, and not get pregnant until after we graduated. Well, that went down the toilet. So anyway, I had to move home with Mom and Dad because they needed to hospitalize me. And Dr. Foote, our family doctor, was on the other side of Richard's dental office. And he or his nurse, one of them, came to the house at least once a day, if not twice. And I had to have IVs. I got toxemia. I had to stay flat. So this would have been the summer of '63. Ed had to work. He'd come home on weekends or come to Mom and Dad's. And then when fall came, I was still confined to bed and I was getting sicker. So he would go to school in the week and come to Spanish Fort from Logan every weekend. Brent was due the 15th of December of '63, and I started into labor the night of the 18th of December. I've never felt a baby kick. I have no idea what that feels like. They came and checked me. I was at the Payson Hospital. They came and checked me. So Ed and Mom and Dad were there and said, you're not ready. They were just going to keep watching us. They walked out, and I told Ed and Mom, I need to go to the bathroom really bad. And so they got me up, and Brent Brent started coming. They got a gurney in there. I delivered him on a gurney going across the hall to the birthing center. But he had already passed away. He died in the birth canal when I was in labor.
Okay.
So he's considered a stillbirth.
Okay.
But he only weighed 2.5 pounds.
And that was full term.
That was full term. Yeah.
Okay.
And the toxemia, which I had at that time when I was having my pregnancies, they did not. They saved maybe 1 or 2% of the babies from toxemia. Not a good percentage on the mothers. The Dr. Foote, it cost $350. Mom and Dad paid Dr. Foote, and the hospital didn't charge us anything. We buried him. It was so cold. They let me come home from the hospital, but I was too sick to go up to the cemetery, and we buried him the 24th of December, and we found out, and then they just had a little graveside in Mom and Dad's front room so I could be a part of that, and it was just a prayer and that, and then they dedicated the grave. But on the 26th of December, we found out that they buried him in the wrong grave. That we did not know, we didn't own that lot. So Ed and Dad tried to get him to sell us that lot or give them one of ours, and they said no. So the 26th of December, they had to dig up this vault and move it to a new grave. So then we rededicated it. We went back to college right after New Year's, and that was really difficult. People had given us baby presents, but we gave those all back, and nobody. You didn't have cell phones. I couldn't get a hold of friends. And so we got back to college and into our apartment, and our friends from college wanted to see the baby, and it was hard to tell them that we didn't have a baby. We finished our senior year. I still had 2 quarters left. Ed graduated, I want to say June 4th, but I'm not sure, of 1964. I worked again for Del Monte that summer. He worked for the BLM out of Richfield. And then as soon as my job ended, and Dr. Foote said, you need to wait to get pregnant, but you won't have toxemia again. When my job was done, I moved to Richfield, and I worked for a land surveyor, Nielsen, and Ed worked in the office for the BLM. And this is kind of fun. When we lived in Richfield, we were right on Main Street, and we were above the pool hall. The apartment next door to us was a whorehouse, and across the street was a liquor store. And that apartment cost us $32.50 a month for 2 bedrooms and fully furnished. And we could watch the parades out the window. But we sure had some really great times there. But that whorehouse was really busy. There were comings and goings all time of the day and night. And the walls were pretty thin. He finished just before Christmas. We had bought we knew we were going to Enid, Oklahoma, to Vance Air Force Base, and that he had been commissioned as a lieutenant in the Air Force. And we bought a trailer. It was 10 feet wide by 57 feet long, a York trailer. And so we put some of our wedding gifts that we had room. We had to pack the trailer. And so we lived in a trailer house. I worked as a personnel manager over 3 stores there in Enid, and Ed was in pilot training, and I got pregnant with Michelle. Let's see, I didn't know I was pregnant, and I got really sick, and the toxemia had come back, only it was worse. So I spent most of my time in bed or in the hospital. And Ed had to go after he got his pilot's license. He was going to stray as an instructor. And so Michelle she was just a baby. We moved the trailer house on base. And I am the world's biggest chicken, a staying alone, big chicken. And I couldn't go to sleep. I laid there and watched this light. It'd go like it was shining in our living room and kitchen in this little trailer. And I got so scared. And so done me. Ed's in at Randolph Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas. And he didn't have a phone. The only phone was on the wall in the barracks. And I called him at 2:00 in the morning. I said, and this guy answered the phone. He said, just a minute. I'll go get Lieutenant Hayhurst. So Ed comes on the phone, and he said, are you okay? What's going on? Michelle, okay? I said, somebody's trying to break in the trailer. Okay, calm down. Did you call the security police? Tell me what's going on. And I said, this light is flashing through the living room window, and it goes white, green. And he said, Janice, open the curtain and look out. No, they'll see me. They'll get me. And he said, no, walk over to the window, pull the curtains back, and look. And it was the light beacon that it was a base, a landing strip. And that's what the sign is on an Air Force base or on a military base, white, green. And that was what I was seeing. So I didn't sleep the rest of that night. And I got teased about that forever. I must have been, Michelle was born the 28th of May of 1966. She was really little. She was right at 5 pounds and 17 inches long. And I had to have an emergency cesarean with her. Right after Michelle was born, I drove to Oklahoma State to finish my degree. I got within 2 weeks of graduating, got put in the hospital again with toxemia, pregnant with Pamela, and I had to be able to go back the next quarter in order to retain all of my credits. And I couldn't, so I lost all those credits. But Pamela, of the 3, I was the sickest, and they didn't think I'd make it. Friends and neighbors took care of Michelle. Ed was still flying, training pilots to go to Vietnam. And I got put in the hospital. I was in a completely dark room. No visitors except Michelle and Ed. The severe headaches and albumin and high blood pressure and all those things of toxemia. And the nurses were great. They let Ed bring up a little box in filled with toys for Michelle. I was in the hospital probably a good 6.5 months. They had to do an emergency C-section. They talked to Ed and said she won't make it. She's hemorrhaging. We've got to tie her tubes and stop the hemorrhaging. And so right after the cesarean, they did that, but I didn't. I was unconscious. So Pamela was born the 8th of May. She weighed 5 pounds also and was 17 inches long. She and Michelle, and they had dark hair. I didn't know she'd been born until my doctor came in and I was awake, and it was the 10th of May. And I'd only been out of the coma maybe a couple of hours. And I said good morning to him. And he said, Janice, it's not a good morning. Pamela just passed away. And the lady that was in the room with me, she had a big baby. And she started screaming, give me my baby before you kill it. And it was just all this turmoil. And Dr. Scott said to the nurses, you got to get her out of this room. Well, Ed didn't know that Pamela had passed away. He didn't know that I was having complications that day. So they moved me clear to another wing in the hospital. They had Ed land early. So he came to the hospital in his flight suit and comes around the corner, I guess, and they're scrubbing my bed down. And he thought I died because the hospital called him down on the flight line and said, there's been a death at the hospital. You need to come right now. And because I'd been so sick, he thought I died. And nobody clarified that. Well, then when they were scrubbing the bed and the girl with the baby had been moved out, he was sure I died. And then he goes to the nursery and Pamela's gone. And so it was just terrible. They got him to me, and Mom and Dad flew out. He didn't have Mom and Dad's help on Pamela. On Brent, he had Mom and Dad's help picking out a casket and clothes and a blanket. So he had to go buy her a dress and get blanket and everything, pick out the casket. They let the mortician bring in the casket. So I got to see her before they closed the casket, and Mom and Dad got to see her. And then as soon as I could travel from the surgery, we flew to Utah, and Ed drove. We buried Pamela. She died the 10th of May. But anyway, he drove out in like a 30-hour period. He didn't stop. He just stopped to eat and go to the bathroom. It was just so traumatic for him and for both of us. We stayed in Utah for about a week and a half, and then went back to Mountain Home, and we had to deal. I had to deal emotionally, and Dad was so supportive that I would never have children again. That Michelle would be our only child. And then as time went on, in 1969, so 6 months later, no, not even 6 months, in November of 68, I got hepatitis, only I didn't know I had hepatitis. But my eyes were yellow, my skin was yellow, the urine was black. I was sick, but I was bound and determined I wasn't going to be sick. So we had all these people coming for Thanksgiving, and I had infectious hepatitis, didn't know it, so they all had to have shots. I got put in the hospital the day after Thanksgiving, and couldn't see Michelle. I stayed. I talked to the doctor. I said, I won't go anyplace. Please let me go home for Christmas. And so they let me go home Christmas Eve. Mom and Dad were there. And then in January, when I was clear from the hepatitis, the end of January, I had to have a radical hysterectomy because I was hemorrhaging again. So I was 25, and I was 25, and I have my name and address. Everything else is gone. So that was kind of a crazy time. Really crazy.
Can you give me the birth dates for each child that you had?
Yeah. Brent was the 19th of December of 1963. Michelle was the 28th of May, 1966. Pamela was born the 8th of May of 1968 and passed away the 10th of May. And then we adopted Scott. He was born the 11th of July of 1972. And he came into our lives the 2nd of August. And I had the IV drips with all three of them, but all three of them, they never moved that I felt. They had a hard time getting Michelle and Pamela to cry, but they told us that if Michelle lived, that she would probably be a vegetable.
Wow.
Well, she's certainly not a vegetable, and
no.
And they didn't give us that with Pamela. It happened quickly in 2 days, and they just aren't strong enough. It's really a miracle that Michelle lived.
Yeah, certainly, especially having one and then her and then losing the one after her. It's crazy that she did make it, and she was obviously meant to be here.
Oh, obviously. Yeah. And I really, Ed and I really believe that Scott was meant to be in our family.
Oh, for
because
sure.
of all the things leading up to it. And I called him and said, we're not going to adopt like 6 weeks. And they already knew that whatever he was, we were going to get. And then because I was so sick after, and the adoption was 6 months early, and sealing him to us, and the name and the blessing, and then that being diagnosed with MS.